Good evening, everyone. So I've made this video for social studies primarily. And so tonight we're going to be looking at Unit 3, which is Civics and Government. And we're going to be starting out with Lesson 4. Some of you may have already heard me talk a little bit about Lesson 4. I may have covered the first page, but then we're going to be going on after that. So I'm going to try to get through at least 3 or more lessons today. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the social studies packet that you would find under the current packets, high set social studies, high set book. Okay. So here is where we last left off. About a week ago, we talked about how many branches there were inside of the United States government. Okay. And those branches are called, the first one, legislative branch. Okay. The second one is the executive branch. And the third one is called the judicial branch. Okay. So today we're going to start out by talking about the legislative branch. Now, another name for the legislative branch is the U.S. Congress. And as we read through here, you'll find out more information about it, of course. So it says here that the U.S. Constitution created Congress to be the nation's legislative branch. Now, this Congress is broken down into 2 houses. Okay, it's called the bicameral legislature. And what that means is, for bicameral, it means having 2 branches, chambers, or houses as a legislative body. Okay, so these 2 houses are now going to break apart from Congress, and they're going to break into 2 parts. Okay, the first one is going to be called the House of Representatives, and the second one that we'll talk about in just a few minutes is called Senate, the Senate. Okay, now the House of Representatives is going to be the one that has the most members. It actually has currently 435 members. All right, so that's a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that every state has like 10 or 15, for every state. We don't break it up evenly. It all depends on the state's population. Now, states like California and Florida, they have a large population. So, of course, they're going to have a lot more representatives for each of those states. So let's say, for instance, like California, they don't have just 2 or 3 major cities in their state. Indiana primarily has Indianapolis. And then, of course, we have smaller parts, okay, like Lafayette. We have, Bloomington, Anderson, places like that. But they're not as large, of course, as Indianapolis. Now, in California, they do have a lot larger cities. They have San Francisco, Sacramento. They have San Diego and Los Angeles. Okay, just to name 4 of them right there. All right, so I looked it up and I wanted to see how many House of Representatives are for California only. So when I looked this up, I thought it was pretty interesting which is a pretty large number, they actually have 53 representatives just for California alone. All right. Now, if we was to compare that with Indiana, I'm going to put in here how many members are in the House of Representatives for Indiana. And of course, here I'm going to go on down. Here is kind of a fast website, just to look and see how many states, what states and how many House of Representative numbers they have. Let's take a look. All right. So Indiana has 18 House of Representative members. Okay. So a lot smaller than 53. But if you actually compare it with another state like Wyoming or Delaware, all right, these two states actually have small populations. Okay. And when you have a very small population, you may only have one member representing your state. Okay. Wyoming, it's not a small state in itself. It actually is just north of Colorado. It is a pretty open state. It has the Yellowstone National Park. Okay. So that makes up about half of the state right there, which wildlife. Okay. But there's not a large population in Wyoming. And of course, Delaware is a very small state on the East Coast, of course. Okay. So just depends. All right. The other house that we're going to talk about in Congress is the Senate. And it says here that each state has 2 senators, regardless of the population. All right. So if you think about how many states do we have in the United States? We have 50, right? And if there's 2 for every state, that means we must have 100 senators in Congress for the Senate. Okay. So let's look a little further into this. It says here that the majority party in the House chooses a leader, and that leader is known as the Speaker of the House. Now, that Speaker of the House has they have very big responsibilities. Currently, our Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi. All right. So it says here the Speaker has an important role in managing the House's debate over proposed laws. So the Speaker also assigns other members of the House to committees that are going to perform other oversight duties. All right, so all members of the House, including the Speaker, are elected to 2-year terms. Now, it just depends if you're limited to how many terms that you can actually go up for. Now, so if the Speaker is limited to a 2-year term, okay, well, you might want to ask, well, how many terms can Nancy Pelosi serve? Well, altogether, she can serve if she gets elected as the Speaker again. She gets 4 terms altogether. Now, she has already served. She's on her 4th term right now. So her term as a Speaker of the House will be ending in January of 2023. So we only have another, 9 months or so of Nancy Pelosi. And then someone else will be chosen, be elected. Okay. It also says here, the official head of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States. Now, you might say, well, how does that work? Because doesn't the President and the Vice President belong to the executive branch? Well, that's true. But if there is ever a decision that needs to be made because there is a tie among the Senate or maybe even the House of Representatives, primarily the Senate, then the Vice President would have to come in there and make that decision for the tie. And that has happened before in the past where the Vice President has had to do that. All right, so the Vice President normally only takes part in the Senate votes in order to break a tie. Okay. Now, here is members of the Senate are elected to serve for 6 years. Now, how many terms can they do that for? It may be unlimited. I'm not sure about that. So that is something that you can look up, and it'd be really nice if you take some notes on that. And that's when you're going to turn your notes in to my assistant. Okay. So I would love to know how many terms can a senator serve for. We know they can serve up to 6 years. There has been a few senators that's been in Congress for quite some time. All right. Now, the legislative branch is mostly responsible for making laws, and it does have checks on the other branches. Okay. So we talked about previously about what's called checks and balances in the US government. What that means is, let's say we have the three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. So let's say, for instance, that the House wants to pass this law, or maybe update a law or change that law in some way. Okay. Now it's went from the House and maybe it's going to go to the Senate. Okay. Or vice versa. Okay. Now it's going through the Senate and maybe the Senate approves it. Okay. Now, in that Senate and in that House of Representatives, you do have Republicans and Democrats and maybe some other party members. Okay. But when it comes to the Senate, you have two from every state. You have a Democrat and you've got a Republican, I'm sorry. Now, when it comes to the House of Representatives, it's not equal. Typically, they'll talk about, right now, the House has more Democrats than it has Republicans. Just a couple of years ago, it may have had more Republicans than more Democrats. Okay. So it just depends. And it all depends also is who has been elected. Okay. It all boils down to that. So if it clears Congress, okay, the legislative branch, we have to make sure that this also goes to the executive branch. Okay. And if the executive branch does not approve it, then maybe the president will, he'll veto it and he'll send back that information to Congress, and they have to look at it again and they may have to make some changes. If for some reason it doesn't, the executive branch does not approve it, it may even be able to go to the judicial branch to get approved. And that's the 2/3 law that we're going to be talking about. Okay. So it says here that Congress must approve some actions and decisions also made by the executive branch. So the executive branch, even though it's the president and the vice president and what we might call his cabinet or her cabinet, okay, it does have to go through another branch to be approved, because they just don't have unlimited power, or else, we wouldn't have the Constitution that we have today. Okay, so for example, Congress has the power to confirm or reject the president's nominees to certain offices. So Congress can use this power to exercise influence over the judicial branch, since the president appoints justices to the US Supreme Court. So if you think about, I believe her name is Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she has been nominated by President Biden to go up for that position of the Supreme Court justice. There is another person that dropped out. Typically, when there is a Supreme Court justice, there's just, a certain amount, like about 9 or 10, just depends. That person's in there for life. They're grandfathered in once they get that position. The only way that they could relinquish that position is either through death, retirement, sickness, or if they do something extremely bad. Okay, that's the only way a Supreme Court justice can be basically relinquish their position. Right now, I don't know if you've heard, but there is an older gentleman of African American descent, and he is actually in the hospital, and I believe it's due to COVID. And he is a very popular, well-known gentleman when it comes to the Supreme Court justice. And I'm actually going to look up his name, because I don't want to say it just in case it's that I'm wrong. Let's see. There we go. Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas, right there. All right. So it says what we know about Justin's Clarence Thomas hospitalization. Okay. So if you want to read more information about that, now you could be very sick with COVID or some kind of infection or condition. And, as long as you're not out too long, of course, you don't have to give up your position. Okay. In fact, one of our previous Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, passed away. And here she is. She is known as RBG, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She is Caucasian, and you can tell her apart from all the other justices because she is very, very petite. Okay. So she is, or she was, I'm sorry, she was really more of a liberal type person. When you take on that position as Supreme Court Justice, you are agreeing to be partial. Okay. But we all know it's human nature that these Supreme Court justices are going to go in there with their own life views and life morals, and they're going to have their own thoughts. So some people may not believe in abortion. Some people may actually be very open-minded to different things. So, every Supreme Court justice that is appointed into that position is going to be questioned. And so that's why it says down at the very bottom that Congress can use this power to exercise influence over that position. So what happened is that Congress did question Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she went through questioning, and also the previous appointee that was appointed by President Trump, she was questioned a lot too. She is a Caucasian female. I don't remember her name, but I know that she was kind of swaying kind of like Republican ways. She was very family centered. She did not believe in a lot of very liberal ways. Okay. So they questioned her pretty harsh. So the Democrats questioned her. And of course, I'm sure with Ketanji Brown Jackson, probably the Republicans are going to really be harsh and kind of question her as well, because they want to make sure, can you be impartial and open and work with the other Supreme Court justices? Okay. All right. Next page, it says here that for the U.S. Congress's main job is to make laws. Now, every law begins as a proposal called a bill, and members of Congress debate and they vote on these bills. Now, and I was talking about this just a minute ago, if a bill is approved by Congress, it goes to the president for approval. Now, many bills never even reach this stage because, they have to go through the House and they got to go through the Senate. And, like I said, you're going through two major parties, maybe some additional parties, but primarily Democratic and Republican. So that's why you don't see a lot of bills changing very quickly or not getting approved. So you really don't hear a whole lot about them. Okay. However, a committee can choose to vote down a bill. All right. So can the general membership of each House of Congress. So we're going to review this flow chart below to see how a bill becomes law. Okay. So we start at the very top on the top left. Okay. The bill is introduced to the House of Representatives. So we're going through the House on the left. All right. It says that it's discussed and it's voted on by the committees. After that point, it says it is sent to the general membership for debate. And then after they debate back and forth on this, they're going to vote on this new prospective bill or law by the entire House of Representatives membership. Okay, over here on the left, some extra information. Bills can begin in either house of Congress. Ideas for bills come from legislators, special interest groups, the president, or other citizens. Now, down here, it says in the Senate, members can slow debate or attempt to prevent a vote by giving long speeches called filibusters. Now, I've heard this word. I wasn't sure exactly what it meant because I've heard a lot lately the word filibuster. Okay, so that is where, again, the members can give a slow debate or attempt to prevent this vote from going through. Okay, or giving long speeches. So senators do this when they know a bill that they oppose is likely to pass. So they're trying to slow it down. Okay. Over on the upper right-hand corner, it says here, the bill is introduced in the Senate. And then after that, it's discussed and voted on by the committees in the Senate. It is sent to general membership for debate. And then it's going to be voted on by the entire Senate membership. So they pretty much, the House of Representatives and the Senate goes the same way. Okay, they go through their steps. All right. Finally, after these two parts of Congress, you're going to have where the conference resolves differences between versions if necessary. So once they come together, then after the conference resolves those differences, then the final bill, and this takes quite some time sometimes, okay? The final bill is going to be sent to the president. Now, the president can either sign that bill or the president can veto it. All right. So the word veto, let's take a look at what that means. And then I'm going to take a look at that box over to the left. So if you veto something as a president, and it should mean to turn down, okay, or reject. All right. To veto means the power of right vested in one branch of government to cancel or postpone the decisions, enactments of another branch, especially the right of a president, governor, or other chief executive to reject bills passed by the legislature. Okay, so again, this could be where the president may say, okay, I'm rejecting this altogether. You need to go back, or you know what, there's a few things that I think need to be changed in this. Are you going to agree or not? Okay, so it's going to go back to Congress. Okay, and of course it has to go through all the route again. Okay. And it says over here on the left side, Congress can overturn a president's veto with a 2/3 majority vote. However, that does not happen often. All right. So if we think about a big area that's been discussed lately, and that's student loans for students. Okay. There have been students where their school has folded up and they are no longer, open as a college or university. Basically, they folded up and they went away. So some of these people will have a diploma and maybe they go to a job or something like that. And maybe this job goes to check on their references and their past education, and they find out, well, you know what, this diploma for some reason may not be any good. The school's closed. I can't find out any definition that you went to this school, okay, because they're no longer in session. And then you have other people that might be on an income limit. Okay. So the president has, when we had nominees to go up for president, a lot of the different people, they said they made promises, of course, and they said different things. So you had a lot more of your Democratic nominees talking about helping people with school loans. Now, Biden turned around and he said that, right before he got the president, okay, became the president, he said that he would go ahead and cancel $10,000 for every student that has a student loan, or a person who has a student loan. That has yet to be seen. All right. Then there's been other senators and House members that has tried to persuade the president to at least do that, if not go up to maybe 50,000 forgiveness, or maybe even forgive altogether a lot of these school loans. So this is something that has definitely been with the Congress. It's been with the executive branch. Biden now turns around and says, hey, if Congress agrees and sends it to my desk, I will sign this bill. But he's kind of taken the easy way out, because now he wants someone else to do the job. So then maybe, he's asked people, his closest people, cabinet members, to make sure that he actually legally can do what he says he's going to do. And so far, he hasn't announced anything. The student loans are due. They're to come due May 1st for everyone that has a student loan to start paying. And you know what? That may get pushed back. We don't know for sure. I think a lot of it also not only had to do with COVID, of course, but also now with the war in Ukraine, and our economic status right now is kind of fluctuating because of things going up in prices. So that can have effects on laws passing. Okay. And how, a lot of people are now concentrating more on the war in Ukraine. And that is a very important thing to be concentrating. So other things are going to go by the wayside that were, of higher importance at one time. Okay. So here is your lesson for practice. You have your vocabulary, bicameral legislature. What is a bill? What is Congress? What is the House of Representatives? So instead of just writing, a couple little words here and there, try to look up some additional information, when it comes to senators and House of Representatives, not just their terms or how many there are altogether, but maybe look up, their ages, what is the age limit? Also, when it comes to House of Representatives and the Senate, there is also, you do not have to be a US born citizen to be in either of those positions. You do, however, need to live in the United States as a United States citizen for so many years. It could be 5 years. Out some of the information and then, kind of write it down in there. What is Speaker of the House? What is that person's responsibility? All right. And then down here, we have a skill practice. And it says here that we have a step-by-step bill to law. What happens? Well, step number 1, the bill is introduced to the House of Representatives or the Senate. The second step is the committee discusses and studies the bill. The third step is the committee votes on whether to send the bill to the floor. Step number 4, they go through that point, which could be a fill in the blank at this point because it's not filled in. Then step 5A, it's approved. The approved bill goes to the other house to repeat the process. 5B, the rejected bill goes back to the committee for revision, or it may be considered just dead, where they're going to scrap that bill altogether. Or they could even completely rewrite that bill. Okay. And then the last step is the bill is approved by both houses, and then it goes to the president for approval. So let's see what kind of questions we have. Number 7, what step should be added to the empty box? So that's where we're going for. Step number 4, what should be put in that place? All right. Is it going to be A, the bill goes to Congress to resolve differences? B, bill with strong support goes directly to the president? C, the full House of Representatives or the Senate debates and votes on the bill? Or is it D, vetoed bill returns to the committee for a new vote? So hit your pause button and try to look through here and see what you think it is. All right. Okay, so at this point, you just unpaused. Hopefully you have your answer. And the answer to number 7 should be C. It's going to be the full House or Senate will debate and vote on the bill. Okay, over here to the left where it says test strategy, it says here, study diagrams and graphic aids carefully to ensure that you understand their meaning. Pay careful attention to information that seems to be missing or incorrect. You can predict answers to questions like question A by filling in these blanks for yourself as you study a diagram. So let's take a look at number 8. It says here that Emma is using this chart for a presentation in government class. How can she improve it? A, she should add an arrow from step 1 to step 6. B, she should add an explanation of how Congress checks the president. C, she should add a definition of the term special interest group. Or is it D, she should add a step telling what options the president has? All right, so go ahead and hit your pause button and find your answer. All right, so your answer to number 8 should be D. It's that Emma should add a step telling what options the president has. So after step number 6, there should be another step, maybe a step 7 or a step, 6A or 6B, whatever, stating that once it goes to the president's desk for approval, what options does the president have? Okay. All right, we're going to go on to Unit 3, Lesson 5. And it says here, the changing power of the president. So growth of executive power. So now we've moved on to the executive branch. And it says here that as the nation's founders set up the government, they wanted to make sure that the United States would never be ruled by a king. So the Articles of Confederation had no executive leader. But the Constitution, however, the Constitution created what they called an executive branch headed by a president. Now, the president's constitutional duties are limited. Okay. Now, they mostly relate to enforcing laws. All right, so that's mostly what the president does, is enforce laws. Now, they could include, though, how we talked about nominating justices to the US Supreme Court. They could also oversee executive agencies. Now, what kind of thing would you be talking about if we said overseeing executive agencies? What do you think that would be? That would probably be the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, maybe the CIA. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and erase this right here. And if we want to know what is the executive agencies, let's see if the actual dictionary.com, maybe let's see if they have anything about that. Doesn't look like they do. So I'm going to go to Yahoo and I'll type in executive agencies of the federal government. There we go. And let's see, here's a pull down list. Might give us a little indication. And here we go. Now, this is a .edu. Now, it's not 100%, but typically if you see a .gov or a .edu, typically it should be reputable, but you always make that decision yourself. Over on the right-hand side, it looks like here are some executive federal government agencies. You have the Department of Agriculture, so farming, right? And animals, different things, okay? Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, Department of Education. So when Biden came in, he chose who was going to be the leader for the Department of Education. Let's see, Department of Energy, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Justice, Department of Labor, Department of State, Department of Transportation, Department of the Treasury, right? The treasurer needs to look after the money, okay? Department of Veterans Affairs, lots and lots more, okay? So that just gives you an idea. Okay, and also here's some of the higher agencies. The CIA, right? Mention that, the Central Intelligence Agency, the EPA. Now, you may have heard of EPA, but you may not know what it stands for. And what the EPA is, and it's actually very, very important area, it's the Environmental Protection Agency. So the EPA looks after the air quality, the water quality, making sure that, watching global warming, which is a huge area of interest right now. All right. And so it says EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment. And of course, there is actually a lot more: National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which is NASA. And so this is actually a pretty good website right here. Okay. And so we were in the middle of the president's, what the president's duties are. And we said nominating the justices, overseeing executive agencies, and approving or vetoing bills that have been passed by Congress. Now, presidents also have the power to negotiate treaties. And they are closely involved with the making of foreign policy. So, when other presidents or prime ministers or leaders of other countries may sit down, as in maybe NATO, all right, for one example, where they have to agree, they have to come together and they have to agree for safety, peace measures, global warming, lots of different things to talk about. And mostly these are kind of like the higher up nations, okay? Sometimes third world nations do not send anybody to this. It just depends, all right? But there are a lot of countries that do have representation, okay? Over time, individual presidents shaped how the office worked. For instance, George Washington was the first president, and he set several important precedents. And what that means is ways of doing things. So Washington discouraged U.S. involvement in foreign affairs, for one thing. Okay, so what that basically means is that, he wanted the U.S. to try to stay out of other people's businesses or business. Okay. So if something was happening in another country, safety first for that country, let's try to stay out of it and not get involved. Okay. So what he did is he also set up what's called the first cabinet. Now, the cabinet is a group of presidential advisors. All right. And so, we think of, there's different definitions for the word cabinet, right? When I think of cabinet, you automatically think of going to the kitchen and opening the door, right? But this is called a cabinet, but it's a group of presidential advisors. All right. And so the president also limits himself to 2 terms. And there is a good reason for that. I will tell you a story that I read in one of my social studies books. They had said that, there was a couple gentlemen that approached George Washington when he was being considered as being asked if he wants to be a president of the United States. These 2 gentlemen approached him and they said, you really could basically be like a king. This is a new nation. And he turned around and he said, no, that's not what I want for this nation. We fought the British for our right to be free as a nation. We are not going to have royalty, okay, like king or some kind of dictatorship. He wanted everyone to be equal. And that means putting limits on things. So that's why it was basically agreed upon that the president could only be elected to 2 terms. Now, of course, each term should be considered 4 years, okay? And it also goes on to say that other presidents grew the office. So Thomas Jefferson used his authority to negotiate treaties to make the Louisiana Purchase. Now, something kind of interesting about the Louisiana Purchase, which we'll be looking at in the future. We might say, Thomas Jefferson was the president during the Louisiana Purchase, but did he actually make this purchase agreement himself? So let's take a look. It says here that on this date, President Thomas Jefferson approved and signed an act to pay France $11 million for the Louisiana Purchase. The House discussed and approved the payment with a 90-25 vote on October 25th, 1803. During the deliberations, some members questioned the constitutionality of increasing the size of the nation and Congress's role in that process. President Jefferson conducted most of the negotiating with Neapolitan France, okay, and without congressional approval. So John Randolph of Virginia asked rhetorically, does not the president submit this subject to Congress for their sanction? Does he not recognize the principle that no treaty is binding until we pass the laws for executing it? The Louisiana Purchase added 828,000 square miles to the United States. All right, so this whole area stretched northwest from New Orleans to all the way to present day Montana. So that is a huge area. Now, the reason why I was kind of getting to this is because President Thomas Jefferson was actually not present when this decision was made. He had two men that went in place of him, and they actually had to make this decision whether this was going to go through or not. And of course, Thomas Jefferson was in talks with them, so they knew what he wanted. All right. And so they had to basically say yes or no at that point. And so they went ahead and said yes. And that story's not in a lot of our historical facts. Okay. But yeah, this was actually this was made in 1803. So if we look at a map of the Louisiana Purchase, all right, let's see how this map looks. All right, so over here in the orange area, you have the beginning of the United States. Okay, pretty brand new. Okay, so it's grown this far in the orange, and now the nation is actually pushing westward, right? And they're actually pushing to the Mississippi right here in the blue, and they're pushing it into the Indiana Territory and the Illinois Territory. Okay, and so this is becoming more populated with United States citizens. Whoops. And so the president at the time was like, you know what, we're getting a lot more population here, and we need to really step out and explore more and kind of spread ourselves out. We're getting a little too close for comfort. Now, down here in Florida, this right here was owned by Spain. Okay, they had the Spanish there. That's why when you go down to Florida, if you see a lot of different Spanish names for towns and locations, that's why the Spanish-owned area or territory. Now, right here in the green area where it says Louisiana Purchase, well, the orange area were, first owned by the English, right? And then, of course, we went through the whole Revolutionary War, and that's when we became our own nation. But over here in this green area, it was not very populated, but France owned that area. Now, did they make a lot of money off of this area? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. I don't think they really made a lot of money because they did give up this whole area of land because the United States and Thomas Jefferson said, hey, let me buy it off of you. So, of course, the country of France said, okay, you can buy it off of us. But look how much it went from this blue orange area to now it's going to be all the way over here. And Montana, by the way, is up here. Okay, that's Montana. And now it has stretched all the way over here. So it's become 2/3 of the continent now. All right. Now, a lot of this area down here in the lighter colored orange is controlled a lot more by Mexico. And there could be some others, but primarily Mexico or the Spaniards. All right. And of course, up here in the upper right, it says the Oregon country. Now, of course, a lot of this over here out west is very unexplored. All right. So if you think about cowboys and Indians and the wilderness and buffalo running everywhere, that's what you're seeing at this point in 1803. Okay. Let's go on down. And it says here that they negotiate treaties to make the Louisiana Purchase. And then you have Abraham Lincoln, which is the what number president is Abraham Lincoln? He is the 16th president. All right. And it says that he used the executive order to abolish slavery in rebellious states during the Civil War. Okay, so he did use an executive order. There are times where the president can use an executive order. All right, they've got to be sure, though, that they can back up their decisions for this so they do not get into trouble. But he did make this executive order to abolish slavery. And the word abolish means to end. Okay, do away with. Now, as the presidency got stronger, relations between the executive branch and the other branches were sometimes tense. During the 1930s, Democratic President Franklin D. Roosevelt spearheaded a broad series of federal programs known as the New Deal. So that was made by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. All right. And Congress was also controlled by Democrats during this time. All right. And so it passed Roosevelt's programs and supported his ideas. Now, what is the New Deal? All right. So let's take a look and see what that means, the New Deal. Okay. Here's a .gov, Library of Congress. So it should be pretty reputable. It says here that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. So in the summer of 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the governor of New York at this time, was nominated as a presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. In his acceptance speech, he addressed the problems of the Depression by telling the American people that I pledge you, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. So in the election that took place in the fall of 1932, Roosevelt won by a landslide. Now, you might say, okay, what's this Depression about? Well, the Depression really started up in 1929 when the stock market crashed. And of course, this had lasting effects for quite some time, for a few years, and people lost their jobs. What happened is people went to the bank, they started drawing all their money out because, you have your money, you don't want nothing to happen to it. So after a lot of people took out a lot of money, the banks closed up. And of course, things went downhill. People didn't have things to eat. Some starved. Okay. And so it says here that the New Deal that Roosevelt had promised the American people began to take shape immediately after his inauguration. That word inauguration means when he goes, when the prior president gives up his position at that point, okay, which is typically in January, right? Now the new president is now being sworn in, and this is called the inauguration. And this actually took place in March 1933. But our inaugurations now, I believe, are always in January. based on the assumption that the power of the federal government was needed to get the country out of the Depression. The first days of Roosevelt's administration saw the passage of bank reform laws, emergency relief programs, work relief programs, and agricultural programs. So later, a second New Deal was going to then evolve after that. It included union protection programs, the Social Security Act, and programs to aid tenant farmers and migrant workers. So many of the New Deal acts or agencies came to be known by their acronyms. So, for example, the Works Progress Administration was known as the WPA, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, and many people remarked that the New Deal programs reminded them of alphabet soup. All right. So, things like our programs that we have right now when it comes to government housing, government help, the SNAP program, helping families be able to feed their families and feed their children. This all stems from the New Deal. That's where it all started, Social Security and everything. I mean, this all started at this time, starting in about 1932 and beyond. Okay. So if you want to read more about it, definitely, I encourage you. All right. And it says that the U.S. Supreme Court, however, worried that some programs overstepped the constitutional powers of the federal government. So they overturned some of Roosevelt's signature programs. So Roosevelt then attempted to dramatically reshape the Supreme Court. So that's going to be a big one. All right, so if they dramatically reshaped the Supreme Court, let's see what happened. His plan would have allowed presidents more power to pick judges likely to support their own ideas. So this is called the court packing plan. And that, of course, proved to be unpopular at the time, and it was rejected. So the Supreme Court kept its check on presidential power. So again, the judicial branch is one of those major branches. They're just as equal. We don't talk about, we think, okay, we're talking mostly about the executive and the legislative branch. We must not think that the judicial branch is equal, but it's just as equal as the other two. Okay, and they have just as much pull. All right. Okay, and then for lesson 5, the changing power of the president. So interpreting sources such as King Andrew Jackson was president between 1829, so we're going back a little bit before President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 100 years before him. We're backtracking. And so between 1829 and 1837. Now, of course, this is about 30 years before the Civil War. So this is pre-Civil War era. All right. He believed in acting decisively as president. So, for example, Jackson forced South Carolinians to agree to a tax that they disliked. He also challenged the checks and balances that were written in the Constitution. He refused to abide by a U.S. Supreme Court decision about Native American lands. So this is one big area that's a very sore subject when it comes to Andrew Jackson. So if you talk to people that know about some history and you mention Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, they probably remember Oh, he's the one with the Native American lands. Well, his strong opinions made him unpopular with some Americans. However, historians generally agree that Jackson transformed the presidency. He made the office into one of the stronger leaderships and influence that it had been before his time. Okay. So while he had a lot of rule, and he actually, he was, it says he kind of, made it an extra step in the executive branch as the president. They came a step up even more than it was. He was involved in some very areas that were very let's see, what would you call it? You could call it racist, or you could call it not really, not good things that we look back on now. Okay. The reason why is, you know what? I'm going to bring it up. Andrew Jackson and Native Americans. He actually was in charge of the Native American Indian Removal Act. And what that means is the Indian Removal Act was signed into law in 1830 by President Andrew Jackson. The law authorized the president to negotiate with Southern Native American tribes for their removal to federal territory west of the Mississippi River in exchange for white settlement of their ancestral lands. Okay. So here's the thing. When it says in exchange for white settlement of their ancestral lands, the white settlers, this isn't their ancestral lands. This is the Native Americans or the native lands. This is what they've lived on for all, probably their whole life, and then all their ancestors beyond that. Okay. So very sticky subject there, and if you read about some of these areas about how the Indians were moved or the natives were moved, and there were a lot of people that died along the way. All right. They were actually forced. Basically, they were told, you know what, let's talk about this. And if they didn't like the idea, they were basically made to agree to this. And if they didn't agree, of course, they were going to be taken down. All right. And they were either pushed or killed. Now, some of the natives, they went up into the mountains. And that's why you see some native tribes that would be in like the Smoky Mountains area, like the Cherokee. They actually went up there and they hid. And the thing is that the government, the federal officers, they're not going to go up into the mountains. And even if they tried, who has the upper hand in those mountains? It's going to be the natives, because they know the area. And of course, these federal officers are coming up into a mountain region. So of course they're going to be easily seen. So probably a lot of the officers would have given up or would have been killed, trying to take out the remaining natives. Okay. So there is an area called the Trail of Tears. All right. So it has a lot to do with the Indian Removal Act and then the Trail of Tears. So this Trail of Tears was a path, basically a pathway, and it was really, really long. It was across part of the United States. And this is, like I said, this is how the Indians were basically treated, and they were forced to move. And so they had to carry everything that they could on horseback. They had to walk, or they had wagons possibly. Okay. Now you probably wouldn't have saw a lot of natives having wagons back then. Okay. So you would have seen a lot of them walking. And of course, they have babies and they have children, and a lot of these children had to walk, a lot of the way because their parents could not carry them. Okay. So there you go. Andrew Jackson. And it says here in this picture, the artist uses symbols of monarchy to suggest that Jackson is acting like a king. Notice the crown and look at his embellished robe. Okay. And then right here below it, it says the cartoon was created shortly after Jackson vetoed a bill that renewed the charter for the Bank of the United States. So remember, vetoed is where he turned down the bill. He rejected it. Jackson then ordered that all federal deposits be removed from the bank. Some Americans thought that Jackson's decision to remove the deposits went beyond his constitutional powers. So while some of this, these presidents, they try to overstep, they will get knocked back down, okay? And or they will, the Congress will bring them forward, and if they go into too much trouble, they may get impeached. Bring impeachment charges against them. All right. Also, it says right here, Jackson's actions as president pushed the limits of constitutional authority. Here, he is shown stepping on the Constitution. Woo! So that's a pretty potent cartoon there. Yeah, he's dressed up as a king and stepping on the Constitution. Woo! Not good. All right, and here is your lesson practice for lesson 5. There are 4 questions on the first page. And then, of course, this right here, I kind of wanted to look at this together. It's on the second lesson practice page. It says, in this political cartoon is from 1832. It shows President Andrew Jackson having a nightmare in which he fights against Congress's approval of the charter for the Bank of the United States. Jackson opposed the bank. All right, so take a look at that picture right there. Woo. So it looks like there's some serpents, right? Like a 3-headed dragon with its claws. All right, and then of course there looks like there's a younger boy that's leaning back. When you look at political cartoons, you kind of have to look close. What is happening in this picture? I notice a chair back here and what looks to be like a jury. I don't know if you can see that, but it kind of looks like there's some little black figures of people. And of course, here's the chair, and it's got like this, lighted figure around that chair. So could that mean that this chair you're going to be questioned upon? Maybe when you pass, or maybe as the president, he's going to be questioned by the jury. All right. And I'm not sure what's with the boy. It almost looks like he has like a rope around his neck and he's being pulled backwards. Okay. All right. So it says here in number 5, Congress is shown as a monster with many heads. Whoa. So that is, the monster is representing Congress. Interesting. What is the artist suggesting by using this image? All right. So pause and go ahead and write down your answer. All right. So after you answer that question, number 6, do you think the artist views Jackson in a good way or a negative way? And you need to explain your answer. So go ahead and hit pause and write down your answer. All right. So when you want to look up your answers, scroll on all the way down and to page 143, and you will find your answers. And again, this is Unit 3, Lesson 5. So those are the answers that you're going to be looking for. All right. So the last one for this video is going to be Unit 3, Lesson 6. So this is going to have to do with the judicial branch. So the landmark Supreme Court decisions. All right, so creation of the judicial branch. Now, the US Constitution lays out some of the main duties of the judicial branch. And it says here that Article 3 establishes the Supreme Court and says that the members are appointed for as long. I'm going to actually erase that so it looks a little better. Okay, so we're talking Article 3 establishes the Supreme Court and its members are appointed for as long as they wish to serve. All right. And so long as they fulfill their jobs faithfully. Okay. So again, they can only relinquish their position if they pass away, they are sick, they do something really bad, or they just want to retire because they're just too old for this job. All right. And it also states that the judicial branch has the power to interpret laws and make judgments in certain cases. So these include those that relate to the Constitution. All right. So any laws that they interpret have to relate to the Constitution, the national law, or disputes between states. Okay, so we're going to be looking at lower courts, so anything that's lower than the Supreme Court. So if you are suing someone or you're suing a corporation or something like that, you're going to start down at the more inferior lower courts. And then if you have money and you're able to go on with this, or you have a great lawyer, it may go even higher, and it could actually go all the way to the Supreme Court. Okay, so the U.S. government also sets up other federal courts to help to interpret the nation's laws. So the Constitution gives Congress the right to establish these courts. All right, so the Constitution left many details of the court system undefined. So Congress then filled in the details over time. So they came up with something called the Judiciary Act of 1789. So think about this. We won our freedom and our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. The war ended about 1776-ish. Okay, so this is not that long after the Revolutionary War ended. This is about 13 years later. So not much time has passed. So this Judiciary Act of 1789 established the U.S. Supreme Court and many lower federal courts. So the early Supreme Court had only 6 justices. Now, over time, the court expanded, and it has been comprised of 9 justices since 1869. All right. So just to kind of show you some pictures of what the Supreme Court justices have looked like, I'm going to go to images, Google. Okay, Supreme Court justices. And I'm going to put 1800. And let's see what they look like. All right, so right here, and here we go. So there are 9 gentlemen there, and this should be about the year 18. I put 1800, and this says 1898. All right, as you can see, they're much older men, and they're all Caucasian men. Okay. Actually, let's look and put in 1789. See what they look like then at that time. So it said that they only had 6, but I'm not seeing any pictures of 1789. So there probably wasn't any pictures that were taken. They may be drawn in. All right, let's go to 1890. All right, same kind of pictures. We're going to jump to 1930. And as you can see, they all have their black robes on. There are 9 of them. Of course, they talk about their positions. And where's the picture? There we go. Now, again, older gentlemen, come back here. Older gentlemen, and they're all Caucasian. All right. Let's jump to 1995. Let's see if there's any changes. There should be some kind of change. 1995. Here we go. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in that picture, as is, let's see. Okay, let's see. Oh, it's not got the picture. Darn it. All right. I'm not sure if you can see this very well in the upper right-hand corner, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg is on the lower right-hand corner, and Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, right, is at this time, he was the only African-American Supreme Court justice. All right. And I believe one of the women in the upper left or upper right-hand corner, I believe is also Hispanic. Okay. So you were starting to get in a lot more flavorful when it comes to genders and also ethnicities. Okay. And so if we jump to today, 2022, let's see if we have a picture. All right. Oh, here we go. All right. Now, this is kind of strange because that cannot be the Supreme Court justices, but it says, okay, I'm going to go back to the images. I'm going to pick out a different one because I don't see Clarence Thomas in that picture. All right. Let's take a look at this one. All right, so there is Clarence Thomas in the upper left-hand corner. And I believe that the young lady that's in the lower right-hand corner, I don't remember her name, but I believe she's the one that was nominated by Trump. And then the lady right to the left of her, she might be the only Hispanic, or there may have been 2 different Hispanic young women. But both of them didn't serve at the same time. So again, find out some extra information if you want. You know, who are these people? Okay. So currently we do have 9 justices. And it says here in the next paragraph, now the Supreme Court has a strong check on the other branches. And that is called through something called the power of judicial review. And what that means is it's the examination of laws and actions to determine whether they are constitutional. Okay, so the court asserted that it had this power in 1803 decision of something called Marbury versus Madison. Now, the court ruled that part of the Judiciary Act was unconstitutional in this decision. So in doing so, it set a precedent for the work of the court in the years to come. Okay, so if we were to go and say, okay, what is the 1803 Marbury versus Madison? What was so big about this case? 1803 Marbury versus Madison. Here we go. All right, it said it was a U.S. Supreme Court case that established the principle of judicial review in the United States, meaning that American courts have the power to strike down laws, statutes, and some government actions that contravene the U.S. Constitution. So that is why it is a landmark case. Okay. All right. Then in the next paragraph, it says, although the power of judicial review is not stated in the Constitution, Americans generally accept that this is the job of the U.S. Supreme Court. So, if we think, okay, so the case did not go well in the lower inferior courts, that's what they call them, is inferior courts. So if something did not go well in the state court, they just keep going up and up until it reaches, like I said, the Supreme Court. Now, the practice of judicial activism is more controversial. Judicial activism is using the power of the court to make changes to laws or society. Now, remember, who did we say makes the laws primarily? We said that the legislative branch is the one that makes the laws. So that's why this is completely different, because typically the U.S. Supreme Court, the judicial branch, does not typically do that. So, for example, the court's use of its power of judicial review to end segregation in schools was made by judicial activism. So this is something, of course, that went up higher and higher and higher. And so segregation went all the way up to the Supreme Court justices, and they made the final decision. Also, there have been some other landmark cases. So not just segregation. Also, when it comes to, abortion, okay, that was made by the Supreme Court justices. Again, it all comes down to who and what judges are on that Supreme Court. What are their beliefs? Okay, so typically when the president, whether he or she is Democrat or Republican, typically they try to go and appoint someone with their own thoughts, right? So if you have someone who's Democrat in there, like Biden, he may pick someone that's more liberal, okay, and open-minded, okay, as opposed to Republican, who would be more conservative, worried about, family and family life and, different things. They have their different kind of beliefs too. Okay, next page. The landmark Supreme Court decisions. Like I mentioned, there's a few of them. Today, the Supreme Court receives requests to hear some 10,000 cases each year. Think about it. There's only 365 days in a year. That's a lot of cases that they're getting requests for. So the court is the one that's going to decide which cases it will actually consider. It only accepts a very small percentage of these requests. Nevertheless, the court has heard thousands of cases since it first met in 1790. Some of these cases are considered landmark decisions. This is because they set important legal precedents or changed the way governments and citizens interacted. So review the following table to learn about some of these landmark decisions. Notice that some of these, such as the Dred Scott decision, have been overturned by later constitutional changes or court opinions. So for instance, the case McCulloch versus Maryland, 1819, and the outcome was Congress had the constitutional power to perform jobs suggested but not directly stated in the Constitution. All right, I'm going to kind of skip through a few of these. Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. African Americans were not citizens of the United States, and the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. Okay, if you remember us talking about the Missouri Compromise, that's the one where there was two states that came in, right? And I believe it was Maine and Kansas. Okay, so at this point, they were saying any new states that come in, one's going to be a slave state, the other one's not going to be a slave state. So it got to the point where they actually had to rewrite the Missouri Compromise because, again, I believe it was Kansas and Maine that came in, and there was some opposition to whether Kansas wanted to become a slave state. We already knew that Maine was not going to be a slave state. It's way, way up north in the northeastern part of the United States. It's surrounded by many, many free states. So we knew that Maine was not going to be a slave state. But Kansas, they wasn't for sure. So that's kind of where things started taking a turn. Okay. And let's see, Miranda versus Arizona, 1966. People must be told of their constitutional rights when being arrested. So if you ever watch a cop show, or unfortunately, if you've ever been arrested or know someone who has been arrested, they read what's called the Miranda rights, right? Have you heard of that? Miranda rights. Well, I'm not sure who Miranda was that brought this up, but they actually named it after this person, Miranda rights. Also, Tinker versus Des Moines. Now, Des Moines is in Iowa. 1968, students have the right of freedom of speech on school grounds. Interesting. All right. One more page. So the landmark Supreme Court decisions, the United States versus Nixon. Now we're jumping all the way to 1972. Into the Democratic Party's headquarters in the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. in 1972. Over the next several months, it became clear that Republican campaigners were involved in the break-in. These Republicans were working for the re-election efforts of President Richard M. Nixon. Now, Nixon claimed that he had no involvement with this burglary, right? So he also said he had not allowed the White House to try to cover up the involvement of the Republican Party in this burglary. So politicians, citizens, and the media, so the news, began to question Nixon's statements. Now, Congress held hearings to look into the scandal. A congressional committee learned that Nixon had recorded conversations in his office. Uh-oh. Now, when it says congressional committee, think about that first word, Congress, congressional committee, Congress. So Congress is the one that's is questioning this, okay? So the committee asked Nixon for the tapes and he refused. Now, this has happened quite recently where we had Clinton and then Trump also do the same thing. Okay. So this is not something that's just, centered on Nixon only. All right. Now, Nixon said that they were protected by what's called the executive privilege. Trump also said that just recently when the congressional committee asked him for something. And I believe it had to do with the riots that happened. Okay. So the executive privilege, and I'm going to underline this, is the president's right to keep some information secret in the interest of national security. All right, so the issue went to the Supreme Court, and the court issued its opinion in what's called the United States versus Nixon, 1974. And it says here, neither the doctrine, I'm going to make this a little bigger, neither the doctrine of separation of powers nor the generalized need for confidentiality of high-level communications without more can sustain an absolute unqualified presidential privilege of immunity from judicial process under all circumstances. The confidentiality of presidential communications is not significantly diminished by producing material for a criminal trial under protected conditions. So what does this mean? Let's look over here. Well, to begin with, the first top box, the opinion refers to an important constitutional idea, which is the separation of powers. So the court is basing its decision on the interpretation of the Constitution. The court is agreeing that the president has the right to keep some information secret. However, and remember that transitional phrase, that transitional word, however, we're going to the opposite side here. The court does not agree that this right is in effect all the time. So giving up information to Congress, which agrees to keep sensitive information secret, is not always protected. And let's read the finish here. When a claim of presidential privilege is based, as it is here, not on the ground that military or diplomatic secrets are implicated, but merely on the ground of a generalized interest in confidentiality, the president's generalized assertion of privilege must yield to the demonstrated. So that means the specific need for evidence in a pending criminal trial and the fundamental demands of due process of law is in the fair administration of criminal justice. All right. So breaking this down, it means this opinion was an important check on the president's power. So the court said that executive privilege had certain limits. Okay. So they kind of put the president in his place. You do have times where you do have presidential privilege, but there are times where, hey, if we have to look at this, the U.S. Supreme Court and Congress, they do have the right in certain cases to be able to look into these matters. Okay. All right. So we have vocabulary, and this is Unit 3, Lesson 6, vocabulary. All right. Number 1 is asking what were 2 effects of the Judiciary Act of 1789. 2, how are judicial review and judicial activism different? And 3, what is the purpose of executive privilege? All right. And then one more page of questions here. And it looks like it's going to be fill in the blank. All right. So what you'll need to do is hopefully you'll have the packet. If you don't, you'll need to kind of scroll up and down. Remember, I said the packets are up at Northview at the mailbox. You just have to go up to the receptionist at Northview at the desk and just ask them, I'm in Miss Paula's class. Can I take one of every packet? Okay. And I just put up the packets today. So you have a huge thick packet of math and you have a nice packet of language D usage up there. And all the other packets are still up there. Okay. So you're going to be matching these cases with, there are 4 that they are asking about. Okay. So that should be pretty easy. That is the end of this video. And well, you know what? It actually looks like there's a 3rd page. What you'll need to do is you'll need to read this 2 paragraphs, and then it looks like there's 3 questions. Okay. If you have a hard time understanding this, let me know. And what I'll do is I will cover this when we come back from spring break. I believe it's going to be April 11th if you're a Monday, Wednesday night class, or it'll be April 12th if it's a Tuesday, Thursday class. I believe those are the correct dates. Okay. And like I said, if you have any questions about this, just let me know. All right. So we stop right there and we'll go on after spring break. So you have a good night or a good day whenever you're watching this. And I will be making another video.